EMTs, Black therapists, Black doctors, Black dentists, Black counselors, Black social workers. So we are in a place where we weren't before, and it would be amazing for me if we were to have a clinic that we ran and that we passed through. People can still keep their full-time jobs, but their way of giving back to the community would be spending a half a day a week in a Black-centered clinic. And our Black people need to see themselves represented, and we now have the masses to be able to do that. We offer a course called Centering Black Health. So when Delvana talked about the need for a health course, we offer it as an IPE, where we offer a course within the Faculty of Health where we focus on Black health. The course is open, but for 2 years it was predominantly all Black students that attended that course. And they talked about how empowering it was to be taught by a Black professor or Black professors. They talked about how they were able to talk openly about the experience the racism they were experiencing as students. They talked about how they could now understand why their father had a heart attack because he was a Black man. And there was tears shed in that 8-week course. And we brought in health professionals who talked about their experience of being health professionals in their place of employment and how they're navigating a system where they don't see themselves reflected. So when we talk about the need of having an Afrocentric mindset at our university and classes that focus on people of African descent, it is needed. Our students deal with micro and macro aggressions on a daily basis within our school system at university. We know we have initiatives such as the law school and the transition year program. They have done amazing jobs. We have over 250 lawyers because of the IBM initiative. So we know that some of the immersion programs work in supporting our learners of African descent and giving them a group to move through. We also recognize, and I'm probably down to my 1 minute, one initiative that we're very, very, very proud of at Dalhousie University, and it is going to happen, is that we recognize that as people of African Nova Scotian descent, the historical African Nova Scotian community, we're not as reflected as we used to be in the university. So we have started what's called an African Nova Scotian strategy with the support of senior administration. And so the African Nova Scotian strategy is both community and university run, where we are making sure that the stories, the history, the experience of the historic African Nova Scotians is not missed, and that we become as equal to our Mi'kmaq brothers and sisters at our campus. And so if you are looking for it, we just recently did a job posting. We're looking for a director for the African Nova Scotia strategy to help develop our strategy. And that strategy will include such things as continuing to enhance and develop programs specific to people of African descent with a focus on our African Nova Scotian community. So if you don't have that job posting and you're interested, come see me. I'll be happy to share it. So I can say that Dalhousie is making waves. We are able to count how many students are African Nova Scotian descent in our schools, in our university, with an intent to make that look different. We're able to determine our Caribbean and our African brothers and sisters. And that doesn't mean they're not part of our struggle. They're in the struggle with us. They also experience racism and discrimination, and we recognize that. But we also recognize there are some differences in terms of our racial experiences based on where we're coming from and our education. So we support all of our people of African descent, but we recognize some of the disproportionate number of African Nova Scotians who are not making it to university. And we need to ask ourselves why.
Thank you, Barb. Wendy.
All right, good evening, everyone. I guess, wanted to start tonight by acknowledging that this is my community. So I grew up in the square, and wanted to be able to pay my respects to my mother and my father, Dorothy and Charlie Wilson. My father was born in North Preston and moved with his family. He was 2 years old to the community of Guysborough, which really no longer exists as a Black community. And then my mother, her family, after the War of 1812, acquired property in Fall River, another Black community that doesn't exist. So when I talk about or state where I come from, actually this is where I come from. This is. I know we can trace our roots to West Africa. I don't know exactly where. So when people ask me where I'm from, this community is very important. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I am a public school teacher for now. I am in my 18th year of teaching, and I say 18th because I like to round that number up to 20 possibly. I'm giving the Halifax Regional School Board probably most likely 2 more years. And after that, I plan to be employed in an Afrocentric school in some capacity. I think that we do have the capacity, we have the resources, we have it all. We have the feel like the what is the $6 million man. We have the technology, so we definitely have it. So I spent the first 12 years of my career at I'll say a majority black school. I was at Joseph Howe School for 12 years, where probably like 85 to 90% of the students were African Nova Scotian. It looks very different now, but when I was at Joe Howe, we counted them up, Claudette, we counted them up a couple weeks ago, my colleague of mine, Megan Fraser, and I, and there were 9 of us there, 9 teachers. Garfield Simons, Melinda Day, Patsy Barton, Claudette Bowman, Leah Barton, Megan Fraser, Wanda Lewis, Sandra Best, God rest her soul. Like, we not only were able to provide mentorship to the students that we work with. We knew their families, we knew their uncles and aunts, and we knew their grandmothers, and that doesn't happen so much these days for me, but I really appreciated and found a foundation in those days, and had the opportunity to see what was possible when we have black teachers mentoring black students. So unfortunately, as a student in the public school system, I didn't get to have a black teacher until my master's program. So it's the very first time. But I found mentors in other places, and a few of them are here tonight. Shout out to Rosie back there, who was one of my very first employers, and such a great mentor. And you can't be what you can't see. So I got to see that, you know, in different capacities, not necessarily in the school system, but I had a very strong father that wanted me to succeed, so he planted the strong foundation, which allowed me to continue on to post-secondary. I talk about the students that I had at Joe Howe, and they're now young men and women graduating from university, some of them with their own children, and I had a very proud moment last week up at Common Good Solutions when I saw my grade 3 student giving an address to for the Prime Minister. So that was a really proud moment of mine. And it seems as though those students are doing really well. Those students that we had when they had black mentors and black teachers. So I'm just gonna put it on the table. I am 100% up for an Afrocentric school that would be staffed by black teachers, black support staff, black, you know, counselors, black administrators. I think it's important. Can people outside of the African Nova Scotian community work in these schools? Sure, we have allies, that could happen, but primarily, students need to be able to see themselves reflected. I think it's a crime when we think about being a black student in this province and most likely never, ever having a black teacher. So the responsibility that I take on these days is that any black students that I do teach, they end up being my students right straight through to they graduate from the elementary school and so on. They're still sending those kids to me. So they send the kids to myself, and they send the kids to the other 2 black teachers that work at the school. I'm so fortunate that I do get to work with 2 other black teachers at the school, because I think that it's important that black students have black role models and mentors. But you know what? It's a really invigorating feeling to go to work every day to know that you actually have black colleagues as well. So not just for the students, but for the staff as well. It's a twofold. So I heard some statistics, and the statistics that I heard was that students who have black teachers actually do better on test results. The students that have black teachers, behavior is not an issue. Suspension rates go down. If you have one black teacher between the 3rd and 5th grade, you are 39% less likely to drop out of school. So imagine if you had more than one black teacher, what your possibilities would be. We have the ability to see giftedness in our students. We can identify that and take an interest in our students. So I have a vested interest in every single black student that comes through my doors. They're part of my community, and I want to see them do well because as a collective, I want all of us to do well. So I know that this Afrocentric theme schools, cultural schools work. We've seen it. It's happening. We have, you know, the Muslim school, and we have the Acadian school board, and you know, there are Hebrew schools and Catholic schools, and people talk about segregation. So that's the biggest kind of argument that people have is, oh, you're self-segregating yourselves. And Wade Smith, you know, what, 10 years ago talked about Afrocentric schools. It wasn't received very well. I think in the next couple of years, this legacy, this dream that Wade had, we can bring to fruition. I think we're not even almost there, we are there. And I tell you how it starts. It starts this simply. Myself and whoever else is on board, we take in 20 students the first year. We take in 20 students at the primary level, and then we graduate those students to grade 1, and we take in 20 more. And we take in 20 more until we get to the capacity of 120. This is what they're doing up at the Muslim school. Is it Umma Center, Rodney? Yeah. So actually, I was talking to the gentleman that runs that program, and they're looking for a bigger space. They're looking for other property because they have 120 students currently is what they can fit in their space, but they could easily house have 600 to 800 students registered tomorrow. They just don't have the space.
Right.
So these schools are working, and I think it's long overdue. Long overdue. Here's the other, I'm just going to mention one more thing. Here's the other, such interesting fact that I found out that after the Brown versus Brown, the Board of Education decision in 1954, that there were about 82,000 black educators in the South. In the decade following the Brown versus the Board of Education, half of them were fired through the evaluation process. So the schools were integrated. If there were 8 schools in a community, like in a district or a region, whatever they call them, 8 schools, they closed down the black school. So in one school, for instance, there was 11 black teachers in this one, the colored school. And when they ended the segregation and integrated those students into other schools, they closed the black school down through the evaluation process. They fired all the teachers. This continued to happen for a decade following. And we've never been able to catch up. So what I do know is that when schools were segregated in Nova Scotia and in the States, I've never heard anyone complain about the schools being bad schools or not good schools or not good enough. What we didn't have was we didn't have the resources. We didn't have the books that we needed and the building and some of the accreditation that other schools had. But those students felt loved, they felt appreciated, and they were invested in. And so no one ever complained about that. What people wanted is they wanted choice.
Right.
So I believe that cultural schools work, holistic schools work, where we're looking at academics and emotional and social support as well. And I think most importantly is schools of culture.
Thank you. Thank you first and foremost to all of you for sharing your perspectives. We've got some great soil right now for our discussion. And it's interesting, Wendy, that you ended off talking about the segregated schools in the South. And what we do know is that Nova Scotia had its own segregated schools. And Delvina, you went to one of those segregated schools in Lake Loon, and you were one of the first generations that were integrated into what was the school that you went to?
It was called the Lake Loon School. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have my microphone. So I attended Lake Loon School, which was considered a segregated school. And that's one of the things that I think is troublesome, and that is one of the things that's always leveled against, as Wendy said, against any kind of Afrocentric school, is that people say, oh, you're segregating your own selves.
Well, that leads into my question. Right? My question that I have is, and Wendy, you mentioned going to Joe Howe. You have all of these black students. You have like a higher representation of black teachers that were there. What didn't those public school models offer those students to be able to succeed? And what is the added value to having the Afrocentric piece? That's the part I'm trying to get to. It's not just enough to just have black students in a classroom with a black teacher in front of them. So what's the Afrocentric perspective that comes in that actually ensures their success? So that's the question I want to pose first.
I think part of it is some of the aspects of this are universal. Why do white students succeed in the system? Right? Okay, because it was designed for them. So most educators would say that they believe in the philosophy of educating the whole child, which means the social, the cultural, the emotional, the physical, the psychological, all of that. And so we know that our kids are not getting their mental, emotional, social, cultural needs met. And so that the whole idea of educating the whole child for the black child is almost horrific, because we're barely educating half the child. But an Afrocentric school would give our children, our learners, an opportunity for their whole self, their whole human self to be educated, because that means that, that we would always appeal to their emotional needs, their mental needs, their physical needs, etc. And that's true for the Muslim students you were speaking of in their school. That's what's happening for them. That's what's happening for white students in a white Eurocentric school system. And so we are no different in terms of the human family. We were able to have a school that focused just on us. I think that is the fundamental difference. That's one piece, and then I'll let others chime in, because I think the other piece is that there will be a lot of work to try and deconstruct the kind of psychological dislocation that we have had as a result of, the legacy of enslavement. And just to get past that whole aspect of the
Trauma.
Segregation. Yeah, who told us that there's something wrong with us learning together? We need to debunk and deconstruct the myth of segregation, and because we were taken off our terms, because when we fought to have better schooling, we weren't fighting to just sit beside white people. As Wendy said, we were looking for better resources. And this is not unlike, think of Africville, right? So, Africville people were taken off their terms in the sense that they told them, well, in order for you guys to really be able to excel in civil society, we have to bulldoze your community, just like they knocked down our schools, right? And take you and bring you into the city so you can live next to white people. So they told us, we have to knock down your schools, and then we will take you and put you in the schools with white folks. And what that did was send a very sort of dangerous, damaging, psychological message that we were not good enough, and that we are not good together, and that we somehow must abandon our own reality in order to be better humans. And that's damaging, and that's what we learn. And I think an Afrocentric school helps us to unlearn that myth and then move forward to, I guess, a new place, a new psychology, a new identity.
I just want to say that physically, so as an elementary school teacher, my classroom is set up very differently, so that there's room for movement. So students don't have desks. They, I have the alternate seating, the crates, and Marcia, you've been in my classroom several times, but students have suitcases that they can move around. They get to choose so they're given choice. They get to choose where they want to set for the assignment that they're working on. And what I know is that as we're so community-based that we work better together, so I always give my students the opportunity to work as individuals to work alone or work collectively. Do you know what I mean? Or work independently or interdependently with each other. So there's different spaces in the room. And so what I also know is that at this age, I'm teaching 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, is that they really like to move, and especially the boys. The boys love to move. And so teaching some of my black students, what I've noticed is that they'd be able to, this one little boy would be out of his seat, no word of a lie, 40 times a day. And sometimes he'd come up and he'd say something in my ear, and then he'd just go sit back down again. The year prior to me coming to this particular school, he was seen as a behavior because he wasn't listening to the teacher, because the teacher had directed him to go back to his seat 20 times that day, and he was defying him or her and leaving the seat and going back. So he's being deemed as a behavior, and really all this little boy is a normal little fella who needs to move.
Yeah.
Right? So just little things like simple as that, just even how you design a space can say a lot about the philosophy that you're trying to instill in the students and in the school as well, is that we need to give kids choice, and we need to set them up with the skills and competencies that they need to succeed, either as individuals or as a collective, as a group. And we need to not, when they come in the morning, I let them talk. First 10, 15 minutes, they know what they need to do. You've seen them, they come in, and they just need to. I like to talk. I like to socialize. So I give them that opportunity because we are very relational and we're very social. So
Yes.
just something as simple as that can make such a huge difference.
Yes,
Can I
you-
just say something on the separation? Because I know when we were starting the Afrocentric cohort, we have to speak it because we're not all on the same page. So we can pretend, but we're not people of African descent, that we're all for it. So with the Afrocentric cohort, that's what I came up against. We had people within our own community who didn't understand what we were trying to do in a public school system, even though they weren't reflected, and they know that some of our students that did not have a black teachers, or they might not have a black teacher, but putting our students together, they thought that here we are going again, separation. And I said, not once did I use that word, but they used the word against me to say that this is the reason why, that we shouldn't. But I had to push back to them and say, this is the reason why we had to do it. So one of the things is that I want, in terms of psychological, in terms of creating that space and that openness and making that connection with our students and also with the parents so that they understood what we're trying to do for our students, because we know that they're brilliant. We know that they can achieve at the same level, and they can even surpass if given the right resources. But we need to educate not just the students, but also the parents. I want to say that because I know that we can't think that everybody is on the same page and understand what Afrocentricity means. And I just know from working within the public school system, they don't.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Barbie wanted to add something
Yeah,
to
and
that?
I also want to connect with Wendy Lee when she was talking about how schools can start with 10 and then 20, then 30 people. And that's how Marva Collins started her school. And she was one of our speakers that we brought here from ALI when she saw a gap and a need, and she did it out of her house. And then she built a school from there. But going back to some of the comments around the immersion, we know that historically black colleges and university works. And I know that even at the university, we're looking at trying to find opportunities for black students to have those immersion experiences at an HBCU. And we know how impactful that will be for black students to see themselves reflected at a university that's entirely black. And we know that that's why some of our students who come from the continent, from the Caribbean, do so well academically. They see themselves in everything every day. And they often don't even know that racism is happening to them until they come to Canada, until they come to Nova Scotia. And then they realize, oh, I'm black, and you think less than me of me because I'm black. And some have gone through what's called the healthy immigrant effect, where they reverted back to losing self-confidence in themselves as people of African descent because they're now living in a racist environment. And research tells us that. And haven't had the opportunity to have taught on the continent, and Karen and I both take students of African descent and seeing the growth of African Nova Scotian students when they are able to see themselves reflected in a country that unquestionably they're Black and they embrace that. And we took students as young as 16, and every last student we took to the continent have come back and contributed and see themselves as people of African descent connected to Mother Africa. And so a lot of our students don't have that foundation. And it goes back again to the psychological impact that living in a white province country that makes you feel less than has a long-term impact and effect on how you learn and how you see the world. And having a chance from grade primary to grade 12 to see yourself reflected every day would be empowering for our Black learners, empowering. And we know that that would continue to be successful in university because they had that foundation.
Before I have to ask another question, which is, actually before we ask that question, can I ask Zamani, who's sitting in front, to give us a time signal when it is 7:40? Where are we now? So
we're on a jumbo jet.
I need to.
7:47.
We're going to turn it over to the audience in a moment.
Yeah, we want to hear from the
but
audience.
I just have one question to ask before turning it over to audience, which is, we know why we need this. We've seen what's worked. We've seen the math cohort at Auburn, which has been given a Canadian recognition and has been looked at as an opportunity to expand. So yes, clap for that. And we've seen the programs that have come through Dalhousie with the advocacy of the community, with plans, Imhotep's Legacy Academy, the IB&M program, the Black Student Advising Center. We have seen MSBU and the cohort in the Masters in Lifelong Learning, and all of the success that has come out of that. Wendy, you've talked about just the success of how you have changed the structure of your classroom based on your understanding culturally of the students and how that's impactful. But there is one question that we haven't addressed yet, which is this: are we talking about an immersion program, or are we talking about an Afrocentric school? Some of these programs are essentially like immersion programs, the math cohort, the cohorts at university, and some of our programs that we've already developed. But are we talking now about shifting to actually having an Afrocentric school? Is that something that we definitely need to act on? Or are we talking about rolling out a more extensive immersion program within the schools that mirrors some of the language and cultural learning that has happened, say, for instance, with French immersion? So that's the question I want us to bite into before turning it over to the audience. We've only got about a minute or two. And the audience, and I'm going to bring that same question to the audience. I think it's a good way to get us started. If I can just get a word from each of you, then I'm going to, then I'm going to open it. So I'm going to start with Wendy.
That's a really great question, and we actually had that discussion about what it would look like at the different levels. And I think Afrocentric immersion looks really good and can work at the junior high and the high school levels. And I think from the P to 6 or P to 5 levels, depending on where you are with the middle school and whatnot, I think that it should be an Afrocentric school. We give our kids the foundation, and then they move and stream through programs at different high schools and junior high, so they're able to take advantage of those facilities as well. But I think I see it working really well at the as an Afrocentric immersion program at the junior high and the high school levels, where the kids have more independence, they have that foundation, they have their skills and abilities that they need in order to push forward. And but at the elementary, I don't really see an immersion program faring very well, 2 streams in an elementary school, based on the philosophy alone.
Any other quick words before we turn it over?
Well, I would love to see classes offered within the university. If we can't have a whole HBCU at the university, I would love to see classes that are specific to students of African descent, because the Centering Black Health was a primary example of how valued students felt who took that course and being able to have their voice heard. But then providing opportunities at the expense of the university for students to be able to go to HBCUs as an immersion for 4 months or however long that term is, at the expense of the university.
And I would have to echo my sister here, both sisters, to my left here, because I've never worked in elementary school. I've always worked at a junior high and high school. But I have to say that we got to be on our recruitment. And I'm going to deviate it just a little bit from the question, but I think it's important because we have these Afrocentric immersions within our junior high and senior high, but we have to recruit because representation is very important because representation does matter for our children. So we're setting them in terms of the elementary, if in terms of Afrocentricity or our Afrocentric schools. They get into the junior and senior high, then we don't have that representation. They're lucky because they got me and another teacher.
At the teacher's level.
At the teacher
and
level, that's right,
administration.
administrators, right? So we got to have it. So if they're having an Afrocentric school in the elementary, we need to make sure that we recruit just like we recruit medical doctors and lawyers and all those other individuals, right? We need to recruit in terms of making sure we have them at junior high and the senior high level so that we can continue on with that philosophy of an Afrocentric immersion.
And my last comment on that would be the 4 good reasons I think of why we need to have Afrocentric immersion is number 1, I already talked about, which is educating the whole child. We'll be able to do that. Number 2, what is happening currently in public schools is not working. It's failing. Let's acknowledge that. But that's a good enough reason by itself. Number 3, I think that some of the spin-off things of an Afrocentric immersion program is that having something that's situated in the building of a school which has students from all backgrounds is that it will, I believe, be a catalyst for a lot of change in exposing a lot of the institutional barriers that exist in our public school system, because there's no way that all that knowledge and goodness is not going to spread out into the school system. And it could actually, elevate and propel the schools to do good and to do better. And fourthly, I just think it's, it's part of like the whole debate that's happening, and I see my sister Lynn Jones there in the room, and all the work that she's doing around reparatory justice and so forth, is that any serious conversation about reparations for African Nova Scotians, education has to be at the heart of that. And so it also will, be something that I think will spur deeper conversation about how that fits into the whole debate as public policy debate as well. But I agree with Sister Wendy that at the elementary level, absolutely, we would need that nurturing place, and that when it comes to the junior high and high school was like a late immersion, and it should happen in resource-wise. I mean, to build a whole high school and numerically how that would work out and logistically could be problematic, and I think that the presence of our students in that school is needed. We are taxpayers. Yes, we want the 3 gymnasiums, and yes, we want the computer room, and yes, we want the music rooms and theaters and so forth. And we're not going to get that. So if we try to have a separate junior high and a separate high school. So, but as Wendy said, by the time we nurture them so well in from grades P to 6, they'll be able to go into that experience. And I can speak from a different thing, but it's also both Nzinka and both of my daughters went to a gendered school, right? I was very adamant about that. It was very important that, because girls are taught to shrink around boys, when it comes to academics and a whole range of things. So both of my daughters went to Sacred Heart School, which is an all-girls school. And I think the kinds of things that they were able to develop in their character, in their confidence, and in themselves, I don't know if they would have gotten that same thing in a co-ed school, and that they did that from grades P to 6 and 7 to 9, but by the time they went into high school, they'd challenge any man to take them on. So I just think that's an example of a gendered school, and there's been a lot of research done sort of looking at gendered schools, HBCUs, you know what I mean? A very similar model there again, just like single-sex schools, single-race schools, and these things. A lot of these models, or faith-based schools, there's so much wealth of information that could be drawn upon that we could use. And the last thing I would say is this, is Wendy talked about only because it's just a thought, there's a random thought in my mind about the little boy who was jumping up and down, et cetera, and how he was being, labeled as a behavioral issue child. There's been such wonderful research, and I wish I could name exactly about it, about what has happened to Black people as a legacy of enslavement, about that white people have not deconstructed and have not gotten past that they need our bodies, control our movement, which is why, this is what street checks was all about. Is that from in slavery time, it was like just think for centuries, we could not move without being told where we could be and why we couldn't be there and here and there. And as time has gone on, that has never yet been unlearned by white people. So these teachers, when they get threatened by black children moving up and down, they have to know where we are, they have to see where we are, where did he go, where did she go, what are they up to? And this is something white people haven't unlearned. And so this is what is happening. So this is the kind of stuff that has to happen, the kind of research, and or more than that, this is the kind of stuff that we just need to extract our kids from those environments and say, we're not letting you put up with that at this young age. When you're a little older, junior high, old enough to come home and tell, right? Then, we'll let you go to those schools, but then in an immersion context. But when they're little, there's no little kid that should ever be exposed to that because they don't even know that they're being harmed. But they will later on grow up and have trauma.
And I'm just getting up so I can get our mic to pass around. 1 second. Hopefully this is on. Oh, that's just for live stream. Okay, so we're gonna have to just get you guys to stand up and give your questions. So I just wanna open it up to the floor now. And I see Sister Lynn has a question, so please go ahead. I'm going to bring myself back over here.
Thank you so much for a very informative panel. But I hope you won't take offense. But my question really is, what's the holdup?
Yeah.
Having an Afrocentric crew with a big move on over 30 years ago. Somebody just used my archive, was a reporter, and he was going through getting information on the African Nova Scotian community. And I said, oh, I actually enjoy like the archive, but you get over it. He said, you have been doing the same issue over and
Yes.
over again. I didn't need to do all that because I came back today and I would have had the same thing from years ago. So I consider educators like the most educated African people in the community. You guys are smart, but you know what you're doing? You've got the educational background. Many of you have been in the trenches. You have the Christian schools that are overflowing. There's a wait list to get in the private Christian schools. The Muslim schools, they're overflowing. You can't get there. You can't get in the Shambhala Institute. They're over. Everybody's overflowed. In terms of getting in. What in the name of God is the hold up on
Yeah.
having Afrocentric schools? And what I'm thinking for that, that's bothering me.
Take about 3 questions at a time.
No.
I have a lot of faith in the Afrocentric learning institute, partly because many of the people who were involved in this movement 30 years ago are still here, doing this, still debating this same issue. Government came in and really messed things up. I blame it on government. We can't be continuing to blame it on government even today, because we're still standing, and I'm proud of that. But my good God, what is the holdup?
Sister Lynn, if you don't mind, if I can, yes to that, thank you. Reframe your question and just put it to the, because I hear you, I'm with you, we're all with you. But the question around the holdup, can we reframe that with your permission as to what are the next steps? We know what's gone on, we know that what went wrong, what are the next steps?
If you want me to answer, I can answer that quickly. To be honest with you, I'm just going to be on. Even me sitting here tonight is putting myself in jeopardy with the Halifax Regional or R8, whatever it's called. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? HRSB.
Centers of Education.
But the Center for Education is, even as an employee, when I speak out, and I've left schools because I spoke out in advocacy for my community, and I was shut down and basically asked to leave. So me advocating is seen as, just as recently as 2 years ago, me having a tone and not being professional and not being able to get along with the cohorts, my colleagues. Here's the thing, is that I think we just need to make that leap, and it can't be, for me, it can't be connected to me, it can't be connected to the school board. It needs to be separate. It needs to be something totally separate, and that means, you know, for people that have the capacity and have the knowledge and have all the information, because we're on the inside, it means now that we need to be on the outside. You know, we're also linked to pensions and careers and all these other things, so it's a risk. But honestly, it's a risk that I'm very interested in taking. It's an interest, and to begin, I really want to be able to do it in this community to start, only because I know this real estate is the way to invest, and in this community, there's no more land. You can see all the buildings, everything's going up, right? This is a community that sometimes I feel no longer belongs to me. Other people have moved in through the gentrification progress that happens everywhere in every city. But we have the DBDLI, and we have Kamala Street Church, or sorry, New Horizons is doing their church over. There's space to any, what's that? Oh, yeah, yeah.
Consider how would that look when you have all this new space that doesn't get used Monday through Friday or the daytime.
Right.
It's a great opportunity to partner with the AUVA, the church, and other educators who want to do something. There's always helps us a little bit with our mortgage too. But it can be a small private school from pre-primary to grade 3. There's a good start.
Yeah, there's Uniac Square. Uniac Square. You see the police have an office there, and there's the Parents Resource Centers there, and the Salvation Army is in there as well. So all it needs is a cohort of people just getting together and just getting it started.
I want to say thank you, Lynn, for that question. And I can say, and Wendy hit a lot of it on the head. A lot of it is connected to finances in terms of people being connected to their employment and not wanting to make that sacrifice. And I know I would have hoped that some of the teachers who were still young and retired would have picked up that torch, because there was no connection and that didn't happen. Many of you know my lovely gift child, my youngest. The school system wasn't built for him. And I remember calling people who just finished their BED and said, I will pay you as a teacher if you will teach my child 4 hours. That's all the school system really is. 4 hours of the day. After you finish in the school system, take my child, because I don't want him in the public school system. And they weren't willing to do that. So he's now 17. And those same 2 teachers that I approached are now having children who are getting ready to start school. And guess what they're thinking about doing? Homeschooling their children. And they're public school teachers. So we know that teachers don't even want their babies going into a system that they're part of. And so the time is right, and I thank you, Lana, for presenting that as an option.
I just want to make sure that we're, sorry, thank you, Barb. And I just want to make sure with the last few minutes, Monica, we have the time? Yes, so we only have about 10 minutes, and I want to make sure to get some more questions from the audience. I'm going to ask for 3 to ask, one at a time, and then I'm going to give the panel an opportunity to answer. And if we can just lean towards actually giving concrete answers that can possibly be actioned, that would be, I think, the best use of our time. Thank you very much for all of the comments and the meat that you've brought out in the conversation so far. So I see one here. Can I get a hand of any other questions that are in the mix? 2? Okay, so we'll take those 2 and then.
girls, you know, we sent them to private schools and we put them in the school system once we felt that their self-esteem was strong enough to handle the public school system. So we were the educators, the mother of my children and myself, we were the educators of our girls in the beginning. So not every family has that. So I think it's very clear that we have to, just how aggressive it was on our people in Nova Scotia and in the diaspora, we have to aggressively, if that means building buildings, we build buildings. Because, and I'll conclude on this point, it was noted when I was at the Black Educators Association that we are not creating an industry in Nova Scotia that pertains to black learners. I'd like to make it publicly clear tonight, yes, we are. Because education means that we need more black teachers. We need more black doctors. We need the whole educational psychologists. When I was as a regional educator, we were actually, they were labeling our kids SLR, severe learning disability. And I was dealing with parents around, I said, what's this called?
Yes,
And this is intricately woven into the
definitely.
education.
Brother Steve, do you have a question to add that we can bring it in?
I would say, just not a question, but a comment. For the educators that are working in this industry right now, and from a community standpoint, I would support this. We go down to the Department of Education and we create what we need to see. We don't, that's all. And if it means budget, that means millions of dollars, and they will find the money. The money is there.
Thank you. Next question. Yes. Just, we only have time for questions, no comments at this point, but I just want to make sure that we're asking questions. Okay. Okay, so I saw this. We just have, so I just want to know if there are any questions first off the floor that pertain to, I see one here as well, how the next steps, let's try to frame this in terms of next steps. Because like Sister Lynn so elegantly said, what's the holdup? And I think that's what this conversation really needs to end off on, so that we don't walk away and then we're back here doing this again later in the year, next year, etc. Susie as well. So I see one here, but I'm going to ask if you can keep it very short. I'm going to take all three, and then we're going to end off with that.
I'd like to echo what you said here. So my question is, first of all, I really appreciate what's going on. I'm sure the ways people can watch it. in math, science, whatever, everything that I actually hear working on the telephone. Along with those guys just working on the telephone, right? So there's lots of talent here that are underutilized. So I'm wondering if you're already working with the diaspora Africans who are here, and if not, let's talk, and I can hook you up with a lot of teachers, with black teachers, and also for the chance to teach black kids.
Thank you. I'll take the question here. Okay, thank you. Just let you write that question down while we get, I think I saw Susie. Okay, so that will be our last question. And what I'm going to ask is when we do get you guys to answer, if you can focus in on a question that you feel like you can answer to the best of your ability. Not everyone will have time to answer every question, but thank you very much. Susie? Mm-hmm. ACSB. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much, Susie. Those are great considerations. So we had the two that were just mentioned. Thank you. Yes. Madame is behind you first. Thank you.
My question has to do with whether or not this is a community initiative or something that's decentralized.
Very good question. Thank you. Yeah.
Community versus government.
Something that comes from the teachers doing this after school or weekends, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What's the plan?
Thank you very much. Sir, you'll be our last question for tonight.
Taking next steps, I'm talking United States. So we have schools that are, they're not segregated, but they're neighborhood schools, high schools, middle schools, and things like that. And we also have charter schools that have, African American things. I guess as a next step, have you guys thought about maybe taking a delegation and doing research on some of these schools, going out and finding out what they're doing, what their challenges were, how they got things going, things of that nature. That could be a next step to do research. What are their standards? Do they meet the standards of the state, things of that nature? So those are some things I would assume that would be next step.
Thank you very much. These are all really good considerations to end off with. So what I'm going to do is just bring it this way, and you can answer the questions that you feel you can bring your voice to before we end off. I'll start with Wendy. Thank you.
For starting at the school, I think that you guys can hear me okay with this. I think the further we can stay away, we pay, our taxes, so we do deserve those tax dollars. But if that's going to be a hindrance, I think that we look for sponsorship sponsorship and contributions from the community in order to start this initiative. And like I said, if we start small, here's the thing: is people want to be able to have a living wage and be able to support their families still. But if we start small, I think that it's very doable. We get people to volunteer, or we get space at a reasonable cost, and I can see this. I can see this happening in the next, for me, in the next 2 years. I think the next 2 years is feasible.
What would happen with teachers' benefits, for example? That's just a very practical.
So, and that's the thing, is that it's the risk. It's the risk that I take. I put 20 years in, I collect my pensionables, and I move on to something else. I don't allow that to keep me hostage anymore, right? So I just have to make that step. Many people do with, startups and businesses and other careers. It just needs to be one of those steps. And there's so much security in teaching that teachers, once you're in and you spend, that 4 or 7 years, being educated to become a teacher, and then add another couple years onto that to do a master's, is that you almost feel trapped, like you have to stay there, and the whole pension thing and the security and the benefits. But that's where the risk comes in. And the risk is that I need to be willing to give that up in order to make this happen.
Thank you for that very practical answer and truthful answer, but a mindset shift, being able to take risks. Barb, your answers to what are the
research.
final
So in terms of the
steps or next
research,
steps?
I have already started to do research within the HRM community around education and where our failures are and our faults are, and around the assessment and all that. So I do take your suggestion of looking at the US for some of the research information. So I'm going to take that back to my research team and to see where we can go at next steps to look at some of the places. So perhaps you and I can touch base, because we have gone to NAPSI and gone to the charter schools, and unfortunately the system and structure is very different than Nova Scotia. So there are a lot of other roadblocks that would be in our way to bring it here, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And so I appreciate your comment, and we can talk about the research direction. And Toronto, that's right, and we already have information within the Toronto as a chartered school. So that research has started, and I'm happy to share some of that with you.
And I'll answer your question, I guess, in terms of obstacles. And I think the major one was that getting my regional executive director to understand that the public school system has failed our African Nova Scotian learners. And so getting them to change their belief and their mindset to understand that we need to do things differently, that we can't continue to do the same thing the same way and get the same results. So how are we going to tackle the issue? And so I put forth a plan in terms of, this is what I perceive. I need your support in terms of what we need to do, but we also need financial support. We need professional development for the teachers. I need to work, or anybody would need to work in terms of the school, to make sure that the community understood what we're doing, because they actually saw it as separation or segregation, that we're going back to the same old ways, and that, some of the hate comments that people would give to us or give to myself, they would say, are you really ready for that? So just getting them to believe that the myth, debunk some of those misunderstandings or misconceptions, or just for them to just to believe that I had a plan of action that was going to support our students, who are the most important commodity that we have on this earth here, which is our students. And so you had to have the passion and the drive to make sure that whatever you put in place is going to be sound based on research. So I did my research, but I told them, you need to help me do this research as well. You need to give me some funding. You need to work with the teachers that we have, because I had to work with the resources. And yes, we're going to come up against things, but you have to be there. Having the same language, the same message, I had to make sure that everyone, because not everyone's going to believe what we're doing. Remember, we work in a system, right, called racism. And students, as well as teachers, also there was pushback. So they had to buy into what that idea was. So we're talking about taking the philosophical, making it practical.
Yeah.
The theoretical, making it hands-on. We're saying, what do we do differently to support our students? They're not getting what they need here, so we have to do things differently. And so it was just making sure that we invest in their achievement, we invest in their intellect, we invest in who they are, we believe in them. So So if you believe in me as administrator, you're going to support, not just me, but others as well, so that they can roll out this important program.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah,
That question.
powerful.
Before I go to you, Delvina,
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to I'm hearing that misconception is a big barrier, and that's with the school system, even our own kids and the parents. So, I come from a communications background. I'm just going to put out there that I think there needs to be some sort of campaign around why Afrocentric a school or immersion is needed, and that campaign needs to target our own people as well. Yes, a campaign. So we get someone. ALI puts together a campaign. They hopefully can hire someone to run that, and that then we're dealing with that issue head on. These stats that Wendy brought up, which were so illuminating around having a black teacher before grade 5, and your chances of not dropping out goes down by 39%. Those are things that we need to hear and we need to know.
In our community, who've gone from segregated schools into junior high at an integrated school, were able to be taught that particular issue.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, I had black teachers before grade.
Mm-hmm. So it could be a video campaign where we talk to some of, especially our elders, about their experience going to a school with other black people and black educators. So we have a minute left.
Yep, okay.
to have our last comment. I just wanted to get some action items on the
Yeah.
table before we leave.
Yeah, well, this
solutions
is
coming good.
this is a challenge to put my last thoughts together because, my sister Lynn there, she always has powerful, insightful comments and piercing comments that we need to hear. I love how she does that. She moves us. My sister Lana, she mentioned about the church, and Lana, as you would know, as a clinical therapist, you triggered me. So I need some therapy now because and Lynn triggered me too when she said, we blame the government because they interrupted what was happening. And it made me think about how just at that point of interruption, 3 things that were mentioned tonight were in the works. One was that we were working, and Barb, you were part of it, and Karen, to put together a clinic that we talked to Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard about what would it take to get some clinical therapists, to get some social workers and folks like that together, where people we could purchase a portion of their time from their employers using ALI's monies to do things like educational assessments and so forth for our students. That was the next initiative in the works. The other thing is that Lana McLean and Mr. George Gray, a retired teacher, were in discussions about using the Cornwall Street Baptist Church, which has now been renamed, to start either Saturday school that would grow into an elementary school. That was also in the works. And another thing I just had to get it off my chest tonight was the conversation that was happening to work with the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, who were having their own issues at that time, and how if we were to locate the ALI on that and then do a more of a healing kind of way to consecrate that land all over again, because we know that inquiry didn't do anything for us, and that we need to heal ourselves around that. We just got more divergent from each other over that. But just to say this, why we haven't done anything yet, I don't think we were ready. I think there's a whole lot of growing that had to happen. And as Barb already said, we have a lot more people available with certain skill sets in the sciences, or a lot more senior educators. We have 60 black people now who have their masters in lifelong learning and Afrocentric leadership. We can pull on these people like Wendy and so many others. And some of them, I don't know if they would be on board, because some of them, it depends. The question is, when we talk about an education, what kind of education are we talking about? An education for what? For personal development? Are we talking about education for community development, or educational for ideological development? They're all relevant, but you got to decide which one you're really after. Because if we're just going to educate people to just go get a good job and get in a nice house and never look back, don't waste our time on giving them that. And we did that with some of the people in our darn cohort, okay? Haven't seen them since. We know that there's people in the Ivy and MLR program who've never looked back. We know that they're never going to give time. So those people who just want to be educated for personal development, But then there are people who get educated. We talked about the Cultural Awareness Youth Group, who are educated for community development, and not just for themselves. They want to give back to their community, right? And then there are people who, incorporate all of that to say, and it's not just for myself, and it's not just for my community, but it's also for the ideology and philosophy too, because we have to learn our way out of this situation. And I'll just say this, which is like, we know there's people, some of them in this room, when we stood up, we were all pushed off our terms. We were either like taken out of our roles, funds taken away, or moved to different schools. All these things happen to us. And I can look around this room, and we know who we are. Everybody in the room knows who we are. And we know exactly what happens. So to the critical question about Lynn, from Sister Dr. Lynn Jones, is should it be, and to Sister Claudette, should it be a government initiative or should it be community-based? Well, this is a little term I've been coined lately, and I said, the most revolutionary thing we could do was to take back control of the education of our children's minds. And I think Brother Steve got it when he said, yes, what he did with his kids, I did with my kids, that when they were old enough and strong enough in their self-esteem, I could put them in the junior high system and then on to high school. But the most revolutionary thing we could do is take back control of that P to 6, and she's so right, it has to be ours, because we would then revolutionize the mind, and I believe that the revolution cannot be subsidized. I do not believe it can, and that's my term. The revolution will not be subsidized. The revolution will not be subsidized. It can be televised, but it will not be subsidized. I'm telling you. So we have to own that. If we don't have the money yet, even if we have to form an Afrocentric homeschool network, and you get together, at the end of the day or something like that, because if we don't have the money yet, if we have to get a joint curriculum, you get 20 parents and we're all following the same curriculum, and and you get together, so many times a week until you can get money for a facility and so forth, like she said Marva Collins did. That's what I would say it has to happen. And the last thing I would say is that as we go forward, we have to have political mindfulness. Political mindfulness, because there will be those who will present themselves to be a part of something like this. And we have to always ask, are they legitimate in their intentions? Are they legitimate in their own personal history? There will be people who will come forward and that their main objective will be to advance their career, advance their reputation, to be a hero or shero, and, or people who are just gatekeepers and stoppers, or hangers-on who don't want to even learn the real essence of Afrocentric knowledge. So I'm going to stop right here to say we have to make sure that as we go forward, that we have a lot more public debate. This is a public policy question. So it's not that this group of people sitting here or ALI is leading this. We're just raising the question. And we hope there are many more opportunities for us to have public debate on this, because at the end of the day, we do have to determine who are the legitimate leaders to advance this idea. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hearing is that we're closing now, and what we need to do next is take some food with us as we go out on the door and make sure that we turn this into action. So if the next step really is to know who's going to be leading this, let's make that our next topic of discussion. So thank you. So before we do that,
point of privilege, yes.
I just know our brothers in the back waiting to close us down.
Let's give Zing a round of applause for being here. But no, I just wanted to mention very, very quickly, and before we do this, I think that we have to call upon the courage of our people to start that P6. Because everybody else that we watch doing it, we see how great it is. Those people are taking the risk, and then they're sending the children to those schools, and they're paid for it. We have to be willing to do exactly.
So, okay, I just wanted to make sure that I give a thank you.
For an immersion program to be successful, it has to be an integrated program. So we have a smattering of courses
We have to create it as a form of program, which is why we have to design this program. And so the next step is for us to hold a symposium to design what the Afrocentric immersion will be. ALI will be hosting in the future, and I'm putting it out there, a symposium to design this model, and then we have to then, with the communications piece, rally community to demand
Campaign.
that we actually have
Right.
this infused the same way everybody else, the same way the francophone people ask for certain things in the school system, the same way other communities are demanding certain things in China and everything else. We have to make that demand. We have to get to
Excellent.
in spite of our fragmentation because of government.
Excellent. Yes, a symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Symposium. So I see some folks getting up. Please do take some food with you. But before we close, we want to just give some respect and thank you to the panelists that have taken time to prepare, share their experience with us. Thank you. Thank you for all of you. Many of you are educators and involved in our community. Thank you, Delvina, for talking and giving notes during the entire panel. But I want to make sure that you get your gifts and thank yous for spending this time with us today. These are from the library, and Crystal wants to give them to you.
This was to be an African Heritage Month program, and we missed February. However, as the keeper of the T-shirts, I held out for the panel. So I'm presenting to each and every one of you an African Heritage Month 2020 T-shirt. Compliments of Halifax Public Libraries, one of our partner in this event, as well as TD Bank, another partner. So I have one for each of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So I know that we have to get out of here quickly. So please take some food with you and make sure to connect on your way out. Thank you, everybody.